Just to get us started, I don't think it is the only reason by far, but I do remember how many of us with great ambitions were still held back by the fact we were trying to do our 9-to-5 jobs, do our own calls, and look after our children running to the nursery to pick them up before the nursery closed. I remember that very well for many years. So I think there is a reality about the fact that if you're married to a doctor like I am, we share 50-50 we used to share all the childcare 50-50, but now the kids are older, we don't need to do that so much. But I think there are plenty of colleagues, female colleagues, who didn't have that set up at all, and who would miss out quite a lot. Some people here have mentioned the networking that goes on. Often it is after 5 o'clock, because until 5 you're very busy doing your day job, and the networking is very important, as are all the extras that you tend to do after your day job, which means that you can publish, you can get noticed, you can offer to do things for whatever it is that you're keen to get onto the board of. I'll pass it on to someone else, just a reflection.
Hi, so I don't think this works. I'm not sure why. Is it working? Okay. I think it's in part because both the people who want to appoint senior people and women think you've got to succeed in the same time scale as male peers. So there's an expectation that because I know in my generation it was if you haven't succeeded by the time you're 38, if you're not a consultant and a clinical director, by the time you're 38, basically you're just dead, you know. And I suppose that was why I was trying to say to you this morning, the whole idea that you have to rush into a major career and trying to juggle everything. I went back to work 10 days after my second baby, as did Rachel Jenkins and Janet Parrott, just to prove that we women were able to work and hold down very senior jobs as well as have babies. I mean, when I look back on it, we were fighting the battle so as you guys, younger generations, don't have to do that. So I think we need to be looking at careers in terms of, we are living much longer. Don't you dare say you've only got 2 years. You know, we're living longer, we can develop at a different rate. Therefore, I think the whole career progression pathway needs to be looked at from that point of view.
So I think some of it is about what we've talked about in terms of, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. This might be louder.
Oh, yeah, that's what it
So there's a lot of unconscious bias that still exists, and I think Susie spoke very eloquently about a lot of what actually in society exists, and even that we internalise as women. So I don't think there's any sort of easy answer to that question. I think it's a multitude of things that we need to do and change. I do think, however, it is important to understand the scale of what we need to do. That's stuff that I talked about in terms of data. So I'd actually wanted to show all of our data in terms of across SLP about where the women were in terms of their career progression, how much everybody was getting paid. Because actually we don't know that, and I wasn't able to get all of that data in a timely fashion. So that in of itself, we don't know that right now, to even know the scale of what our challenge across SLP is. So I think sort of it has to be multi-pronged, but one of the areas is understanding from a data perspective where we actually are, and then what is it that we need to perhaps put into place to shift some of that. I personally think that we've been trying for so long, and again, Athena Swan worked because the institutes didn't get funding unless they had the right number of women within their professorial chairs. There's something about bringing this into what has to be done as well, because I think otherwise those unconscious biases are really, really difficult to get over.
Do we also need, I don't know, is this working? No.
I suppose I'm kind
kind of deinstitutionalized and have been for a long time. For precisely the reasons that when my children were born, it was impossible. And travel time became the thing that I didn't want to do, and neither did my partner, despite the fact that we both shared childcare. And I'd like to point out that he got as many neuroses about feeding the children as I did, so that was really useful. But it meant surrendering a lot. But it seems to me that you have got some departments that do have women's leadership in it. And the question is, can you have a critique then of the shape of what, as you said, what a career looks like, but also what the hours look like, and how you staff those things? Because I don't know about you, but I work much harder than I need to be working because, you know, I've got a desperately interesting job and I'm desperately bloody overworked, just like the people at the other end of the social spectrum who have to work 3 jobs. And we don't have a sufficient, when we talk about work-life balance, we don't actually talk about this at the profound enough level, about what it is we really think life is about and what it means to make a contribution and what to do, how to do that with other people. So I'd like to throw that into the...
Could I add just one thing? The experiences at the Medical Women's Federation over the last, I guess, 2, 4, 5 years, there has been, I have noticed, and I would therefore echo some of your comments, now a feeling of responsibility and slight panic at times on various boards that are basically all male-dominated in trying to find, and again, I'm sorry if I'm speaking about the medical profession, it's just that I'm more ignorant about the nursing profession, so I can't speak for them, but there has been quite a lot of effort put now in addressing this because there is an intense moral panic about being perceived as doing the wrong thing, whether that is good or not. I think it's excellent that it's happening. It would be good if it came from the right place rather than just the fear of embarrassment. But we are getting regular calls from important boards saying we only have one woman. How can we increase our visibility in order for women to apply? Because that is the other problem. I would like to really stress that when there are opportunities, there are a lot more men applying than women, even in professions where the women now are highly represented. So for me, one of the main issues is to encourage people to go for jobs and positions of responsibility. Obviously, they need to be qualified for them, even if they don't feel that certain that they're going to be successful. A fear of failure cannot exist if we're going to be making progress.
Could I just have one last comment, because I think this... So I wonder if the other issue is what people perceive leadership to be. And I think, particularly in a lot of the NHS, there's a real sense that it has to be, forgive me, I don't mean this in a male way, but a very macho, hierarchical, you will do, it will happen, there is a target, you will achieve it. And if you have a female style of leadership, or what I perceive as a female style of leadership, which is about collaborative, building partnerships, nurturing people, trying to communicate in the language, the simple, accessible language that Derek's so skilled at, that the people who are your audience are there, hearing their opinion, getting stakeholder accounts in, you're perceived as being quite a weak leader or somebody who's pragmatic as opposed to actually authoritative. So somebody described me fairly recently as being incredibly opinionated. The feedback was apparently I was opinionated. And I said, well, isn't it great that that to balance opinionated women like me, we have so many authoritative expert men.
Can I come back to your board? Because if these board appointments are not being taken up by women, I really get that. And what if you have 2 women going in together, so they have the experience together of what it's like to sit on a board, they are supporting each other, they're helping each other with their fears, they're also supporting each other taking risks. I think we know there's plenty of history around you don't just get one black student in on the committee, you bring in several, because otherwise you're not, it's just wallpaper. So I think we actually need to demand that 2 or 3 women go in and help.
Can I? Yes, absolutely, and I fully agree with that, and we should do maybe something about that. Maybe that's one of the comments that comes out of today. How do we pair people up? But could I just remark on Geraldine's comments? Yes, that you can't win. You're at the top, and people call you Marmite, they call you unbearable. I sat on a government strategy advisory board for 6 years. It was the hardest personal experience professionally I've ever had, because if you fought what you had to fight for, you were criticised from all directions as being too forceful. But if you stayed quiet, you were a quiet female in a corner, since you were one of the few women there. A nightmare, really, but we will change it. We are already changing things.
I think Vanessa and I have both been sitting here quietly reflecting on what it's like to be a nurse in this position, sitting here with such esteemed medical professionals. But what we're also reflecting on is how great this is, because on both of our boards within our organisations, we actually are part of a board of very, very strong women. And I'm doing the sums in my head, and actually there are equally numbers of women on our boards as there are men from all professions, and things are beginning to shift. The only way they will really continue to shift is if us in leadership positions exert the styles in the manner that we work best to effect change and to improve lives together for the people we work with and for, and to actually role model and help people and facilitate more women into these positions. But I do think it's changing very slowly and very gradually. But within South London, we have the inklings at board level that this is happening.
When we first started thinking about this conference, and Derek had written onto the, anyone in Oxley's would have read it, how we have to congratulate Oxley's on the high level of women on the board. And I sort of took umbrage at that, because I thought, yes, we must congratulate Oxley's on this, there's no question of that. As I see, the morning of this conference has been focused on the clinical, more private content of individual suffering, and the afternoon is elaborating more general discourse about leadership. So I think that division is reflected in services. That yes, some women do make it, and Susie in her talk says being seen and being heard engenders mental health. Yes, it does. But being seen and being heard is dangerous as well. It gets you picked on. It gets you discredited. It gets you called names. It gets you called opinionated. It makes you feel terrible. You don't know if you can carry on. And so there needs to be a way of somehow making the bridges from the majority of the workforce at the NHS, which frankly are women in underpaid positions who wouldn't even consider leadership. They may not even be eligible to access the NHS, actually, because they are coming from places where they have no rights. Now, how is that fact that the majority of the NHS is comprised of women who are underpaid and with no prospect whatsoever of career progression going to meet the afternoon's conversations, which are also needed to be had? How is that woman working as a nurse on? And it's great that you're saying there are small gains made and that you're beginning and you're seeing results. But it's not only that being a woman who can have confidence and speak out is engendering her health. She can look at the levels of stress that women in our services who have spoken out have had to engender. And you are saying one of them, that you had to go back to work straight after having a baby. That's dehumanising. Exactly. Yeah.
Mind you, I was also stupid.
No.
I was fighting. It genuinely was a demonstration that you could still think, you could still be confident, you could still see people and have had a child. And the thing I would say to any of you that are having babies or recently, what was fascinating, I think if you ever don't quite know who you are, or you ever don't quite know what absolutely in your soul is what you want to do, try doing it 10 days after a baby. I went straight back to clinical work because that's in my soul who I am. Rachel, who I was with, brilliant academic, went straight back to academia. I couldn't make two figures add up. Rachel, it's very, very, very interesting. So that's something I would ask.
I would say that it was endemic in our culture in those years that you either did that or you were not considered. I remember very clearly being told in some way or another that either I was heading straight back, again, I think it was a couple of weeks or something, or I was going to miss my rotation post, and that would have had consequences. Now I'm looking back thinking, what consequences would that have been? Maybe taking your membership exam 6 months later, but at that time, that's how it was. And that's a victory for us now that I haven't met anyone in recent years who's done something as mad as that.
It's not mad and it's not stupid. It's called surviving in a complex context in which you're not just a mother and you know it.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
I'm going to pass to the audience. If you're happy to tell us who you are and your background, it helps, but you don't have to, of course.
Thank you. My name's June Weisberg and I work with Maggie in the Women's Service. So I'm sort of sitting here thinking, I see a whole panel of women here, very experienced, successful, worked really hard, ultra committed, and I'm sitting here thinking I'm part of a service where it's being cut and yet we're not paid. So I don't know if there's any more people in this audience that isn't paid here. I imagine you all get your salaries. But somehow this service has survived and seen something like 600 women in 18 years. And how is it that we're in 2018 and we're in a position where a service is going to be cut and yet we're not paid? So are we buying into some sort of abuse? Are we buying into some sort of unconscious resistance towards supporting women? I don't know who can answer that, but I'm wondering amongst the panel here, who can actually help this service?
Would like to take that?
Well, can we go to the press?
Look, I'm outside, so I can do anything because I'm not bound by a contract that says you can't speak to people or you can't do this. I know about this service. I've known about this because I've known Maggie for a very long time professionally, and I've been in awe because it's the only damn service that I think is paid for inside the NHS. On the other hand, it's been diminishing and diminishing and diminishing, and she has been more and more creative in terms of trying to hold it together and not do anything second class, except for the trainees who are totally exploited. In no other profession do people get exploited like this. I mean, carpenters get paid, apprenticeships get paid, but psychotherapy apprentices do not get paid, and yet they are treating some of the most troubled people in your area. So, yeah, I think we need to go public, but you also need to fight for this within whatever your organisation is. I think this is your platform, Maggie. Don't be shy, for God's sake. You've got Derek, you've got other women here, really, everybody should be signing up, if they can agree to it, that this service needs to continue and needs to have funding. It's not an expensive service. It's very, very cheap. It's a few people's labour and a building.
Thank you, Susie. It's not just Maggie. It's the whole team. It's a whole team, and not just the team who work in the NHS. It's people like Susie, all our CPD teachers, including Susie, Valerie Sinner, Peter Fonagy. The people who have come and taught in our service have never taken a penny for their contribution, not a penny. So there's a whole zeitgeist of a movement which has wanted to not just help create the Women's Service of Oxley's, but to sustain it and teach in it, provide CPD, and all the trainees, most of them, when they finish their placements, they continue to carry on working. So it's a service which engenders a kind of commitment to the kind of issues that women need to think about and need to deal with. But in terms of, I was sort of thinking back to Susie's talk, and she talked about the witness, how in mental health, clinicians, especially nurses, doctors, therapists, we are what I said this morning. We are witness clinicians, and that makes us dangerous. And I mean, I've recently read Christina Wieland's book, The Fascist State of Mind, the Manufacture of Masculinity. We need to work out what it is about women and the power of women, and what women are capable of creating and producing, which creates in return a kind of reciprocal, vindictive response which would seek to close it down. And I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about something that is underpinning in the dynamics of the discourses in which we work. So women who witness, who can say, this is hell, this is dehumanizing, this should never be allowed to happen, we become dangerous. We become witnesses to the dehumanization of women and men. And in that position, we are easy targets because there aren't that many of us. And I mean, I always think of that poem, First they came for the Jews, you know. First they come for the women that can be picked off. And I hope the Women's Service of Oxleas will not be one of them. And I'm terribly enthused by the response today. But I think we all need to take account that it isn't love that is going to overcome this.
Please say something. I'm just going to ask why you couldn't say something.
Who's that?
You.
Oh, I just didn't want to hog the mic because I've been speaking quite a lot.
Someone else on the panel say something?
I can pass to the panel. I also want to know, also, there are other questions too. Maybe we can take as part of what...
Yeah, I do have quite a lot to say about it. I just didn't want to be
Okay.
Yeah. I will say one thing. I think there is a current unfortunate trend towards disregarding the needs of the trainees in various fields, and I really empathize with the situation here. We have a very similar situation in my national clinic, and it's very painful, and I don't know how to change it, and I worry about it weekly when I see people come in struggling to pay their rent and continuing to be so committed to treat in this unique, only service in the country that I run, this group of people who have nowhere else to go. And yet, I don't know where else to go and where to find a salary for them. So all I'm saying is it's an unfortunate situation, but we may, if we expand and work together, find a lot of very important centres that the NHS really needs and relies on in terms of its excellence, to shout out, actually, that we are experiencing this unspoken problem.
Thank you, Tracy. I don't know if any of the panel, I know it was more of a reflection rather than a question. If people want to, I would say I've never known anyone to argue as much for CAMHS as Geraldine. I've always taken on the point you say about if you invest in children.
Could I just make one point? Because I think I have only relatively recently realised what the benchmark situation is in London. So between us all, between Oxleas, Southwark and St George's and SLAM, we're actually in the NHS benchmarking club of per capita spend on mental health across the whole country. We are so far off to the left and down the bottom that I honestly can't believe it. Croydon is probably the lowest funded per capita spender on mental health in the entire country. So I think in some ways, I'd happily talk to you afterwards about what I understand the other situation to be, but it's just to say that I actually think that across our partnership, we are being driven by an extreme level of uninvestment in mental health, and I think we can say it's all about funding, but I think what we have to be able to describe and articulate is the impact that is having on the real lives of real people. And I'm going to say two other things very quickly. One is, internationally, there is every global government, every government is disinvesting in public sector services. That is almost yesterday's news. I will fight for the NHS to my death, but one has to recognise internationally, governments are looking at pension pots, they're looking at the fact that 46% of all people now are self-employed. There is a movement in that direction. So what's happening in a number of places around the world where they're trying to kind of get to grips with focusing on this is either to establish charities. Oxley's has always been probably particularly disadvantaged by not having, like the GKT charity is £800 million on it. They're looking for someone to sit on their board. £800 million worth of money to invest as a charity. The South London Maudsley charity is actually incredibly, it's fundraising as furiously as it can, and it's funding some really good things. Like the Recovery College, it's just set up a community interest company doing kind of women's issues. So looking at where there are those pots of money, because you're in the patch, can be bid for. But the other thing is also internationally, there is something called, if you do nothing else except look something interesting up, the Democracy Collaborative. Have you looked at the Democracy Collaborative movement? Because that's an international movement which is about population-based places. So what happens in those places is people get together, not just the health service people, not just the fact that local government has disinvested 50% of spend, or central government has disinvested 50% of spend in local government, but you get together within this patch local entrepreneurs, high net worth individuals, businesses, and the mantra is this is our people, our place, our time. So across the world there's a lot of what's described as philanthropic foundations which are now responding to the kind of calls for help that people like us have. And I have to say one of my very, very proudest moments as NCD was a big Canadian bank called the Beck Foundation. And they're a family of bankers. And they came and they wrote me this lovely letter saying, just heard about you, and basically said, we have, working in our bank, a son with schizophrenia, and we now have a grandson with schizophrenia. And until this movement to publicise mental health and publicise what it is, and publicise there are treatments that work, there are people that care, we could never, as a banking family, have actually disclosed to anybody that there was that level of mental ill health in our family. But we now have, and they've set up £100 million, £200 million kind of foundation. And they are one now of about 350 international foundations that, because people have had the courage to speak out, are now willing to invest in mental health. And I genuinely think we all have to think about how do we get some of our funding from sources that isn't just public sector spend, because I think that's really tough.
I think we'll time for another couple of questions. One and then two.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Clifford. I'm the head of service in South West London St George's. My background being crisis care, prenatal, acute care, urgent care. And just before I answer that question, I'm struck by the observation that I made about the several microphones there. Many of them are dummy microphones, but there's one golden one, which is, I'm sure there's a witty remark about the opportunity to be listened to is reduced to one microphone. I just wanted to consider how, as leaders, I think there is an important role to be played in creating opportunities for other women, both men and women, I believe, but in terms of creating the conditions for them to develop to their own potential, develop to the level that you operate at, but also to develop to the level above you. So I think the ultimate mark of success is how we would develop women and then see that their potential doesn't just add just below us or to the side of us, but being really delighted if they end up managing us or managing an organisation. So I just wanted to know, what have you observed or what have you done in your practical day-to-day work in order to facilitate women?
I've got the one golden mic. Who would like to take it?
Go on then, somebody who hasn't talked, you guys done that end. Well, nurses are brilliant at nurturing, come on guys.
Director of Nursing.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to speak from the other end of, and I'm very honoured to be here among you eminent women, and I'm at the opposite end. And I've listened a lot, particularly to what you were saying about nurturing, and I think, yes, take the opportunity to nurture just that one person. Because I was nurtured, and Karen Young, the consultant here in our crisis team, nurtured me, spotted my talent and my ability, and she was the one that gave me that kick. And here I am now. Personally, I don't think my journey is going to stop here. I hope it doesn't. You know, I've just been given the most wonderful opportunity to go forward. And I absolutely love what I'm doing. I'm passionate about crisis work. Spent a lot of time in a home treatment team. Crisis work, it absolutely floats my boat. It's what makes me get out of bed in the morning. And all that has come through somebody, one person, taking the time to nurture that, see something in me that I couldn't see, and bring that to fruition. So that's the start of my journey.
Thank you, Ruth. I think actually you're going to have a very long and successful journey ahead of you. The reason I paused when the question was posed then, and it is an absolutely excellent question, is I'm not sure that the answer is altogether, clear, crystal clear, or easy to articulate. But I think it's the way that we approach many of the challenges or problems or things that we want to change is nurses, women, I'm not sure what it is, but we tend to seek permission for things. And I say this all the time, that anything that seems to be successful in how we're making progress, in things that we're developing or improving, we have to stop letting people ask for permission. We have to assume that they've got the permission, they are empowered, and they have the tools to be able to do it. And I think we're still a little way away of building that culture into everything we're doing. The other thing is, I cannot underestimate, as Ruth has said, the power of having a role model or someone believe in you or saying or giving you that positive reinforcement throughout your career and on a day-to-day basis, just to make people feel special, make them want to go on, make them want to do more, improve and strive for something else. And it's those softer skills and those little things that really, really make a difference to who and how, particularly women, then progress in the NHS, let alone anywhere else.
I guess the other thing I'd add to that is also about giving each other real feedback about how you're received and perceived, and in doing so in a way that's supportive, because I think it's through those small moments of taking the time to not just tell people when they've done something that's really good, but say, actually, you got that slightly wrong, but we can support it in that way. And but it's from those things that I think we really learn. And alongside that, we can have great leadership programs. We can have days like this, and they're brilliant. If you go back to your work environment and the policies and procedures and the way in which we manage our services squashes leadership back out, we're not going to make that change. So I think it's about everybody kind of living what we need it to do all of the time. I guess I've got real examples about flexible working, people coming back from retirement, and we say the right things at the top of the organisation, and then in the middle part of the organisation something goes wrong. And I think the only way we're going to get that right is through working together on it.
Well, there are two components to my answer, but I'd like to share both. One is that I allow myself about 20 surrogate, I call them my surrogate children, they're my youngsters. They're not all women, and I think it's about 2 to 1 women to men, but I also have some very young men who I really care about, who I'm nurturing. Can't do more than that, so if anyone else comes along and there's, that's too many, so they have to kind of, as they grow and into their roles, I then find newer ones. But I try and do that because I feel I need to give something back, because people were very kind to me all my life in terms of mentors. Mainly they were male mentors, actually, all the way through. But so I want to do something now. But there is something practical as well. And so there was an image I showed earlier about a book about women with gambling problems. Well, that was actually Gambling Disorders in Women, A Global Perspective. It's a book, a large book, written by women researchers across the world about women patients. And I think if we hadn't thought that up with my friend and colleague and had got this done and published, probably it might have been another 20 years before someone thought of it. So what you can do is very practical things. The things Derek has done, to raise the profile of women in a specific field and look at the issues with the podcast, that was fantastic. So there are things that we can take on as missions, as well as our everyday kindness and everyday mentorship and sponsorship that you were talking about so well earlier. I'll pass this on.
Hi. The Me Too movement was begun actually in 2007 by an African-American woman under the motto, using the power of empathy to stamp out shame. And I think the shaming of colleagues, of people trying to struggle, knowing what they're suffering, and actually then allowing them to become isolated, go off sick with stress. This needs a movement. This needs coming together to think about and to understand within the services themselves. One of the struggles I'm having at the moment is to retain, and I was thinking about Geraldine's newly found role, which to me, being grandmother of 4, is the best thing, the best role in my life, which is we need to retain our grandfathers, but we need to retain our grandmothers. We need to retain them in the services. We need to sustain our services with the experienced people who would otherwise have been encouraged to believe that they were due to leave in a couple of years because the pension comes up. It's a fulfilling role, and we need to make it more fulfilling for our grandparents within the services, not when they've gone out to do gardening,
So I suppose at a personal level, interestingly, there are younger women who are from Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds who probably gravitate towards me more, and probably a little bit the other way around too. So I guess that those are the people perhaps that I have nurtured a little bit. It's only a little bit. There are lots of people who, what's that thing of, it takes a village to bring up a child or whatever. It's a little bit like that for everybody, really. Leaders, it's a whole group of people. So I do my bit. I don't think it's a very structured thing that I do. And I think that certainly some of the conversations we've had back at SLAM about coaching and mentorship and making that a little bit more strategic and robust is positive. And we need to think about how that comes into action, because it's not enough really for a few of us to do what we can on the side, is it really? I mean, we need to do something a little bit more structured than that, I think, if we really are going to synergize and make a positive, bigger impact. I suppose the other thing is just thinking about, I've organised a lot of conferences in my college roles really, and always trying to think about where are the women, making sure that they're balanced, the keynote speakers, the symposia, and we heard earlier about this recognition of people reaching out actually to say, we don't want all male boards, so where are the women? And it's not always easy, but we really make a huge effort, and I've always consciously made an effort. And also on Twitter, interestingly, I saw one chief executive who has said that she will have no all-male selection panels, and the amount of stick that she's received for that is quite incredible. But those kinds of things, and actually, again, within our trust in SLAM, making sure that we have a BAME representative on appointment panels for senior people as well. So the same sort of thing, because it doesn't completely get rid of unconscious bias, but it helps, because people think a little bit differently, and they can see talent in different places, not a replica of themselves. And I think that's really important. So, again, I think it's no one simple answer, but there are a multitude of things that we can and could and should be doing. And potentially just having to think about where's the low-hanging fruit? What can we do relatively easily to perhaps make make some of that a little bit more systemised than just, all of us do what we can. But really, it's clearly not enough, is it? It needs to be a little bit more systemised, I think.